The silence before the stormed room was quiet, too quiet for a place filled with billion-dollar minds. It was the annual closed-door summit of the world's most powerful tech leaders, held in a quiet retreat deep in the hills of Northern California. No cameras, no press. It's just visionaries, billionaires, and their closest advisors, inside a glass-walled hall that overlooked mist-covered redwoods. Sundar Pichai sat at the far end of the long wooden table, his hands clasped gently on his lap. He wore a simple gray blazer over a navy shirt, no tie and no fuss. Beside him, a digital tablet rested on the table, displaying a single slide with one word in bold white text. Reimagine. Opposite Sundar sat Elon Musk. Arms crossed, his expression a mix of curiosity and challenge. He had just finished a loud and animated pitch about a new AI-powered infrastructure system that, in his words, would eliminate human inefficiency in government and education altogether. The room had buzzed with excitement, murmurs, nods, light laughter. He thrived on shock value, and everyone knew it. Now all eyes shifted to Sundar. It was his turn, but Sundar didn't speak, not yet. He looked slowly around the room, scanning the eyes of those present. There was Tim Cook, quietly sipping espresso. Satya Nadella, leaning slightly forward, his pen tapping on a notepad. Susan Wojcicki, with her arms folded and chin raised. Even Jeff Bezos had returned to his seat just to hear what Sundar might offer in response to Elon's dominating pitch. Finally, Sundar cleared his throat. "What if I told you," he began softly, "that AI doesn't need to replace us?" Everything. A subtle shift rippled through the air. What if, he continued, the future of technology wasn't about control, but about listening? Elon chuckled, just loud enough for the room to hear. "We've been listening, Sundar," he said, smirking. "But the world doesn't move forward on whispers. It moves forward on action. Big, bold, uncomfortable action." Sundar nodded gently. "Sometimes the loudest change," he said, "begins in silence." He tapped the tablet. The word reimagine vanished, replaced by a live chart. At first, it looked unimpressive, just a series of faint blue dots rising steadily across a dark background. "This," he said, "is what we've been testing. Quietly, humbly. In 3 rural schools, 2 public hospitals, and a network of family-run farms in India." He tapped again. New data appeared. Electricity usage, crop yields, student literacy improvements, hospital readmission rates. Each metric was followed by a vertical line. After that line, each chart soared upward. "We didn't build a new system to disrupt everything," Sundar said. "We built one to support what already exists, using AI to enhance local knowledge, not erase it." Elon leaned back, arms still crossed, eyes narrowing. "Sweet," he said with a hint of sarcasm. But it sounds like charity, not transformation." A few titters around the room. Someone poured more coffee. Sundar didn't flinch. "I understand," he said, still calm, "because what I'm going to show you next is the part you weren't expecting." He swiped the screen again. Alive. Satellite image appeared. One of the rural school districts where the test had begun. It showed rooftops covered in solar panels, small wind turbines nearby. A series of digital kiosks built from scrap and refurbished tech. "We trained AI models locally," Sundar said, "on data from the community itself. The people decided what mattered. Not algorithms, not us." And then with another tap, the chart shifted. Revenue from those same schools and farms. Hundreds of thousands of dollars generated, not donated, from micro-enterprises. Launched using the tools created through Sundar's initiative. Automated crop pricing. Decentralized tutoring networks. Telemedicine with real-time diagnostics. Powered by regional data. Each backed by an open-access framework that allowed other communities to adapt and expand without dependency. The room fell completely silent. Even Elon didn't speak this time. "We called it Project Ananta," Sundar said. "It means infinite in Sanskrit. Not because we think we're building something infinite, but because we believe in infinite potential in every human being." He stopped. He wasn't trying to impress them. He was trying to remind them. And that's what unsettled the room the most. Elon finally shifted forward. "And how exactly," he asked, "do you plan to scale this cute little experiment to something that actually matters to the global economy?" Sundar paused. "By not owning it," he said. There were confused looks. "The entire model is open source," Sundar explained. "We've already received over 400 requests from NGOs, universities, and even city councils across 5 countries. We don't license it. We share it. Because the biggest change comes when no one controls it." Someone at the table laughed nervously. "And how do you make money from that?" "We don't," Sundar replied. "We empower others to make money, and as they rise, so do we." It was a quiet revolution disguised in soft words, and for the first time, Elon Musk didn't have a comeback ready, but the real story, the one that would shake Silicon Valley, to its core hadn't even begun, because what no one in that room knew was that one of the rural communities Sundar mentioned had secretly turned down a multi-million-dollar contract from one of Musk's subsidiaries. Not out of fear, not out of pride. Because Sundar had quietly offered them something far more valuable: respect. And now that community was preparing to go public with what they had built on their own, without any corporate interference. It would change everything, especially when the numbers became public, and Elon Musk would not be laughing anymore. The village that said no. Rain fell gently over a quiet village in southern India. It was not the kind of place people noticed on maps or spoke about in tech conferences. Nestled between 2 low hills and lined with banana trees and dusty roads, the village of Chenapur had always been a place of simplicity, survival, and silence. But that silence was about to echo across the world. A young girl named Meena stood on the rooftop of her family's 1-story home. Her eyes locked on the glowing blue panel in front of her. It was a solar-powered community screen, displaying real-time information, market prices for vegetables, weather updates, crop disease alerts, and even learning modules in the local language. It had become a lifeline for many in the village, a window into the world and a mirror reflecting their own growth. This panel, like so many others installed across the region, was part of the same quiet initiative Sundar had shown in his presentation. But what wasn't shown, what Sundar had deliberately kept private, was the letter the village received 2 months earlier. A letter with a large signature at the bottom and a logo that was recognized across the globe: Tesla Rural Technologies. One of Musk's newer branches. The letter had promised new jobs, better infrastructure, wireless internet stations, and most importantly, a sleek digital learning platform that claimed to revolutionize rural education using proprietary learning algorithms. It sounded tempting. It was meant to. But the villagers hesitated, and then quietly they declined. Not because they didn't want advancement, not because they didn't understand what was being offered. They said no, because they already had something better inside the village council room. The elders gathered once again, seated in a circle on woven mats. The room was simple, no glass walls or leather chairs, but what happened there carried weight. Meena's mother Savatha spoke first. "We cannot trade our voice for their platform," she said. "What we have now is ours. The data is ours. The ideas are ours. And the solutions come from here, from our soil." An older man named Narayan nodded. "They come with gifts," he said slowly. "But the cost is hidden in the silence. They ask of us afterward." They had seen it before. Companies arrived with promises. They built things. They installed devices. And then they left, taking ownership of the tools, the data, and eventually, the dignity. But this time was different. This time with Sundar's model, everything remained in the hands of the people. The code, the devices, the training modules, even the updates were decided locally. Instead of replacing the farmers with machines, the system amplified their instincts. Instead of replacing teachers, it offered them new methods in their own language. Without judgment, Sundar hadn't visited the village in person, not once. Instead, He sent a small team of engineers who had grown up in similar villages, who knew when to speak and when to listen. They came with questions, not answers. They returned with stories, not contracts, that more than any technology, it's what changed the future of China. Meanwhile, back in Silicon Valley, Elon Musk was not pleased. In a sleek boardroom with tinted windows and walls filled with LED maps, he stared at a report laid out before him. The summary at the top read, "Proposal rejected by local council. Declined further communication. Cited existing system as sufficient and empowering." Elon frowned. "What system?" he asked sharply. His assistant hesitated. "It's something called Project Ananta. We're still gathering details. It's tied to a framework developed by Sundar Pichai's team." Elon's jaw tensed. "He's building villages now?" "Not building, empowering," the assistant replied carefully. That word, it echoed in Elon's mind. Empowerment was not the language of disruption. It was the language of resistance. And resistance, in his world, was unacceptable. "Find out who runs that community node," he snapped. "If they won't work with us, let's make sure no one else follows them." But what Elon didn't know was that the village had already gone a step further. A young boy named Ramesh, just 13 years old, had coded an interface for disabled farmers to interact with the AI dashboard using voice commands in Telugu. His idea had been shared in a public repository. Within days, engineers from Nepal and Indonesia had downloaded the code, adapted it, and began testing it in their own rural networks. A movement had begun, and it was spreading faster than anyone expected. On a calm Sunday evening, Sundar sat quietly in his home, reading a simple thank you email from a small school in Tanzania. The message had no attachments. It's just 3 lines. "We used your model. We didn't have to ask permission. Thank you for trusting us." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. There was no press release, no investor meeting to prepare. Just the humbling knowledge that something was growing, something beyond any one person's name or company. Meanwhile, a private channel on an open-source forum, a developer based in Brazil posted a question under the Ananta tag. "How do I integrate localized flood warning data with your AI system? You want to try this in Rio's outskirts? Also, who should I talk to?" Within 5 minutes, Mina from Chenaper replied, "You can talk to me. I've done it. I'm 14, but I'll help." And just like that, a teenager in a quiet Indian village became a mentor to a developer thousands of miles away. But the silence wouldn't last, because Musk was preparing a public launch of his own AI framework at a massive global conference. Just 6 weeks away, and his team had already found a way to undercut the Ananta model using proprietary licensing tricks and targeted ad campaigns. He believed that with enough noise, the world would forget what Sundar had shown. But Sundar wasn't planning to compete with noise. He had something else in mind. Something quiet. Something powerful. And it began with a single number. A number that would shake the foundation of the tech world once it was revealed. The number was real, it was simple, and it would make even Elon Musk stop laughing. The number that broke the silent site began with a leak. Not a dramatic one, not the kind that involves anonymous whistleblowers or late-night news broadcasts. No, this leak came from something much quieter, an open spreadsheet uploaded to a public domain by a small agricultural cooperative in southern India. The file was titled simply, "Monthly Ananta Report Community Insights." It was never meant to cause a stir, but one line inside, the report changed everything. A single metric calculated by a teenage girl, double-checked by her school principal, and verified by the district accountant, quietly made its way into the hands of a financial analyst in San Francisco who was tracking rural economic patterns, the number 418.7%. That was the year-over-year revenue growth for the cooperative using the Ananta. The system, the analyst's eyes widened. He ran the data again, checked for anomalies, resourced the figures. And when it all held up, he published a small report titled, "Is Open Source AI Outperforming Silicon Valley?" with a footnote referencing Project Ananta. That's when it Started first came the reposts on niche developer forums. Then independent journalists picked up the story. Soon, podcasts began mentioning it. And influencers hungry for something real and different started highlighting the quiet AI movement. Within a week, the name Ananta began trending, and then it hit Elon Musk's radar. In a sleek black office, filled with screens and scrolling feeds, Elon stood silently, watching a segment from a news outlet he didn't particularly like. The anchor was discussing how a handful of rural communities in India, Africa, and South America had somehow generated over $11 million in collective revenue in just under a year without corporate backing, without licenses, and without even an advertising strategy. They used an open-source AI model, the anchor said, developed by local developers and guided by a framework known as Project Ananta, which originated from Sundar Pichai's quiet initiative to decentralize technological power. Elon's face remained still, but his mind was racing. He wasn't angry about the money. Not directly. He had made billions. What bothered him was something else, something deeper. Control. Elon believed in progress, but progress under command. Under vision, under brilliance. It's brilliance. And now people were listening to someone who had not tried to dazzle them, simply tried to include them. He turned to his head of strategy. "Cancel the Tesla Rural press conference," he said sharply. "We're doing something else." The man blinked. "Sir, it's already locked in. Investors, media, then unlock it," Elon interrupted. "We're not showcasing a prototype anymore. We're going full global launch. But the framework isn't ready. Then make it ready," Elon said. Voice cold. Meanwhile, Sundar was sitting alone in a small guest house in Bhubaneswar, coastal city far from the noise of the valley. He was visiting a tech literacy camp, quietly run by volunteers, young engineers, helping elders learn how to interact with AI tools. There were no cameras, no speeches, just quiet conversations and warm cups of chai. He didn't know about the leak. Not yet. He was listening to an old woman describe how she used a voice-based interface to file a digital health request for her husband without asking anyone for help. "He didn't believe me when I said I sent it," she said, smiling, until the doctor showed up 2 days later with medicine. Sundar smiled softly. "You believed in yourself. That's more powerful than any system." That night, he received the analyst's report in his inbox. He read it slowly, carefully, eyebrows slightly raised as he scrolled through the figures. Then came the part that struck him. Community leaders across 5 countries had begun forming a coalition independent of him, independent of Google, independent of any central system. They were calling it the People's AI Alliance. He sat quietly, stunned not by pride but by humility. He had started something, no longer needed him to grow. Back in California, Musk was preparing his counterstrike. It would be sleek, brilliant, and loud. His engineers were instructed to replicate the Ananta model's interface, but strip it of its open-source nature. Instead, they built a proprietary platform that could be monetized at every level, with regional customization locked behind licensing walls, and the name of the project, Origin. Short, sharp, aggressive. The branding team had already created taglines. Origin. The future belongs to us. But that tagline would soon backfire, because while Origin was polished and loud, it was designed from the top down. It assumed the world needed another leader, another guide, another figure to shape their future. Ananta, on the other hand, had no center. It was a model built on the belief that people, when given tools and respect, could shape their own futures. The difference is trust. 3 weeks before the global conference, a digital debate exploded online. A rural teacher from Kenya posted a simple thread: "Origin asks us to follow. Ananta teaches us to lead." Within hours, the post was translated into 7 languages and shared across thousands of communities. Musk's team dismissed it as timped-down fluff. Sundar didn't comment publicly. He was too focused on something else. He was preparing to release a global impact report on Project Ananta. No press release, no launch event, just raw numbers. All of them verified, peer-reviewed, and published on a public ledger for anyone to audit. And within that report, one number stood out above the rest: 90-3%. That was the average. Increase in household income across every participating community within the first 12 months? Not a promise. Not a projection. Real impact. Measurable and impossible to ignore. As the report quietly spread, investors began to notice. But they didn't rush to fund Sundar. He hadn't asked for funding. Instead, they began asking the communities, can we build with you? Can we invest in your schools? Can we support your clinics? And the answers were always the same. Yes, God on our terms. Meanwhile, Elon's Project Origin was preparing to launch with a massive light show, drone displays, and an AI-powered narrator. But there was one thing they didn't have. They didn't have the numbers. And the numbers were starting to talk louder. Then the lights, as the day of the global conference drew near, pressure began to mount. Reporters were preparing questions. Analysts were comparing models. Activists were demanding transparency. The tech world was splitting between those who still believed in central genius and those who had seen what quiet empowerment could do. And somewhere deep in a crowded village, Mina, now hailed as one of the youngest contributors to Global AI, opened her laptop and quietly typed a final line in the next update of the Ananta interface. We're ready for the world. Are they ready for us? What happened next would stun even the most cynical observers. Because when Sundar Pichai took the stage at the Global Summit, he didn't come alone. He brought the world with him. The day the world listened, this air in the summit auditorium was electric. A soft blue light bathed the room as technicians made final checks. Cameras adjusted, and the audience, composed of world leaders, tech billionaires, journalists, and policymakers, took their seats. This was the global convergence, the most watched tech summit of the decade. It was meant to be Elon Musk's moment. His team had been preparing for months. The stage had been built like a futuristic arena, with holographic screens rising in, curved glass spirals, and a drone swarm hovering discreetly above the audience, ready to deliver a show unlike anything seen before. But what no one expected was that Sundar Pichai would even show up. He hadn't registered. He hadn't submitted a keynote. He wasn't on the speaker list yet. There he was, walking calmly down the side aisle, dressed in the same understated gray blazer, a small leather folder in his hand. The audience murmured. Some turned to whisper. Others simply stared. Elon stood backstage, watching on the monitor, eyebrows raised. He's not on the schedule, his event director said nervously. Should we intervene? Elon shook his head slowly, a half-smile forming. Let's see what the monk of Silicon Valley has to say. On stage, the light shifted. The announcer's voice echoed across the chamber. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin with today's scheduled program, we have an unscheduled appearance by Mr. Sundar Pichai. There was light applause. Cautious, polite, curious Sundar stepped onto the stage. No lights changed. No music played. No graphics swirled. It was just him, a microphone, and a sea of eyes. He began with a simple sentence. I didn't come here to pitch. The words hung in the air like a pause in a symphony. I came here to listen. The audience was silent. But before I do that, let me share with you what the world has already said without me, without any corporation, without any campaign. He opened the folder and pulled out 6 sheets of paper. He held them up, one by one, as he read aloud. A school in rural Uganda reports an 86% attendance rate increase since deploying Ananta's learning tools. A group of single mothers in Mexico created a microloan AI platform to support each other's small businesses. A fishermen's guild in Bangladesh developed a tidal pattern predictor that saved 2 villages during a sudden cyclone. Each story was real, simple, human, and backed by numbers that had been verified, published, and spread by the communities themselves. You don't need to clap for this, Sundar said gently, because they didn't do it to impress anyone. They did it because someone finally trusted them to lead. The crowd was still quiet. Sundar continued. For too long, we've believed innovation only happens in glass towers, conference rooms, and research labs. But the greatest innovations are the ones that restore dignity, not disrupt it. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. "I want to show you something," he said. He gestured toward the screen behind him. It flickered on, not with flashy animations, but with a simple live feed. A girl appeared on screen. It was Mini. She stood in a simple classroom, sunlight streaming in through open windows. Children gathered around her, watching intently. She looked into the camera and spoke clearly in English. "Hello. My name is Meena. I'm from Chenapur village in India. I helped build a part of Ananta, and today my friends and I want to share something with you." The camera panned slightly. A boy stepped forward and tapped a button. Behind them, a screen lit up with graphs and charts, real-time metrics, showing the community's food production, water conservation, and educational progress. Men continued. "We used to wait for someone to help us. Now, we help ourselves. And we help others too." She paused, then smiled. "We don't need permission to be brilliant. We just need opportunity." The feed cut. The auditorium was silent. Elon and Musk shifted uncomfortably in the green room. His show was scheduled to begin in less than 20 minutes, but something inside him stirred a flicker of doubt, a weight he couldn't shake. He had come prepared to dominate headlines. He had holograms, a narrated origin story, a promotional trailer voiced by an AI cloned version of himself. It was loud, it was sharp, it was clever. But now, it felt hollow. On stage, Sundar placed the papers back into his folder. "We've already seen the future," he said. "It's not made of steel, it's made of trust." Then he looked up slowly, scanning the room. "I'm not asking for funding. I'm not asking for applause. I'm just asking what would happen if we stopped trying to lead and started learning again." He bowed his head slightly, then walked off the stage. No exit music, no lights, just silence. And then, unexpectedly, the entire room rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Not the kind of applause meant for spectacle. This was the sound of hearts being moved, the kind of applause that starts slowly, then refuses to stop. Backstage, Elon watched the standing ovation. He was still a genius, still a visionary. But something in his eyes shifted. He had come to silence Sundar. But instead, Sundar had silenced him with humility, with respect, with numbers that couldn't be denied, stories that couldn't be outshouted. Later that evening, reporters tried to ask Sundar what was next. He gave no statement. He simply walked to the edge of the venue where a small group of students invited from rural programs around the world were waiting. They didn't want selfies. They wanted to ask questions. And soon all listened. Meanwhile, Musk stood in front of the massive stage prepared for his keynote. He looked at the blinking lights, the polished script, the words Origin glowing behind him, and for the first time in a long time, he hesitated. His team waited. Investors texted, the countdown began, and then he stepped onto the stage. He looked out across the sea of eyes, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. And what he said would stun the world. The confession: Elon Musk stood beneath a sky of synthetic stars, projected lights dancing above the heads of thousands watching in person, and millions more live streaming across the globe. The stage had been crafted like a cathedral of innovation. Shimmering columns of light framed him in electric blues and metallic silvers. Drones hovered quietly, programmed to rise the moment the word Origin was officially unveiled. Massive screens behind him glowed with sleek animations that pulsed with anticipation, but none of it matched the weight hanging in Elon's chest just moments earlier. He had watched Sundar Pichai leave the stage without fanfare or demand. Branding, no drama. It's just truth, numbers, and a girl named Meena speaking with a kind of clarity that algorithms could never replicate. The entire room had risen for Sundar, and now, here he was, standing at the same podium. Everything had been rehearsed. The voiceover was ready. Speech had been fed through 5 neural-style engines. The climax of the show was supposed to include a holographic timeline showing Elon's ascent from Zip 2 to SpaceX, to Tesla, to Neuralink, to the founding of Origin, but as the countdown clock behind the stage reached 0, Elon raised his hand. "Pause everything," he said, his voice low. The team hesitated. One of the producers blinked. "Sir, turn off the graphics," he said again. "All of it." Slowly, the glowing background dimmed. The music faded. The drones lowered. Now it was just him alone under a single spotlight. He took a long breath, then looked out at the audience. His face, often unreadable, showed something raw this time, something unfamiliar. Humility. "I was supposed to unveil something big today," he said finally. "Something new, something powerful." The audience leaned in. The entire internet held its breath. But then, something happened. He paused. "I watched a young girl Meanie explain how she helped build tools that changed her village, and I realized, my version of power might not be the version the world needs right now." The audience was stunned. He continued, slower. "Now, I built Origin with the idea that central control meant safety, that if we could engineer every layer of a system, we could ensure it didn't fall into the wrong hands. But what if? What if in trying to protect the future, I've been stealing the present from those who already know what they need?" Room was silent. No one had ever seen Elon Musk like this. He looked down, then back up. "The truth is," he said, "I laughed when Sundar introduced Ananta. I dismissed it as soft, sentimental, charity case. But now I see Ananta isn't soft. It's strong in a way we forgot how to be. It gives people their power back." He walked slowly to the edge of the stage. "I'm not canceling Origin," he said, "but I'm changing it. Starting today, we're open sourcing part of our framework, and we'll work to make it compatible with Ananta. No walls, no gates, no ownership. We'll still innovate, but we'll do it in the open, side by side with the world." Gasps echoed through the auditorium. It was as if the air itself shifted. Billionaire had just admitted the limits of his own vision. Elon raised a hand and pointed at the screen behind him. Instead of Origin, a new word appeared. Co-create. He smiled barely. "We'll see where this goes. I don't have all the answers. And maybe that's the point." Applause started slow, unsure, then faster, then louder, until it became a thunderous wave of acceptance, not for perfection, but for change, for courage, for humility. Behind the scenes, Sundar stood near the hallway watching quietly. His face didn't show surprise. A calm that comes from trusting people long before the world does. A journalist approached him. "Do you think Elon means it?" she asked. Sundar smiled softly. "I think he's beginning to listen, and that's always the first step." News spread like wildfire. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #MENA effect, #Sundar shift, and #co-create began trending globally. Schools that had dismissed Ananta as too grassroots now began reaching out to learn more. Policymakers started drafting new frameworks to include community-led AI deployments. Journalists dubbed it the Humility Summit. But amidst all the noise, something quieter was happening. In a small town in rural Indonesia, a boy named Adi had just connected his village's solar microgrid to Ananta's environmental tracker. He posted a message on the forum. "I used to feel like we were watching the world from the outside. Now we're building it." In a refugee camp on the border of Syria, a group of teenage girls used Ananta's voice training module to create podcasts in Arabic about health and safety. They called it Our Voice Matters. In a prison classroom in Brazil, inmates were being trained to use Ananta to map out economic reintegration programs for when they were released. The world wasn't just watching anymore. It was building back at the summit. As night fell, Sundar stepped outside alone. The sky was clear now, stars visible above the quiet valley. A young volunteer approached, holding her phone. "Double quotes, sir. Do you want to see something?" she asked. He nodded. She showed him a live stream, thousands of people from around the world, not watching the conference, but joining it. Villages, classrooms, libraries, clinics, bus stations, all tuned in. and all asking the same quiet question. How can we help shape this too? Sundar didn't reply, simply looked up at the stars again because he knew. This was just the beginning. But in the distance, in a quiet government office, someone else had been watching the summit too, a senior advisor to an international tech regulatory body. And he wasn't smiling, because while the world celebrated, he was drafting a document that could put all of this Ananta, co-create, the global people's movement under threat. His message was clear. We need to regulate this before it gets out of control. The final decision document was only 7 pages long. No bold headlines, no dramatic font. Just a series of recommendations drafted by a senior policy advisor named Andrei Mikhailov at the International Digital Oversight Council. It wasn't intended for the public, but it carried enough weight to change the future of global innovation. Andrei had been in the audience that day when Sundar Pichai and Elon, two titans of technology, had set aside their competition to speak about open frameworks, co-creation, and community-led empowerment. He had watched the world cheer. He had seen governments express support. Even investors, usually cautious, were showing sudden enthusiasm for decentralized models, and that's what frightened him because, to Andrei, it meant loss of control. Control wasn't about power for him. It was about structure, predictability, accountability. And now, a movement powered by children, farmers, refugees, and ex-prisoners was rewriting the digital map without gatekeepers. His report outlined 3 core risks. Lack of centralized oversight. Who is responsible when a decentralized AI makes a mistake? Data sovereignty concerns. If a community in India trains a model that's later used in Nigeria, whose laws apply? Economic destabilization. When small villages generate millions, where does that money flow and how is it taxed? The final page included a recommendation: initiate emergency talks on binding international protocols to regulate community-developed AI systems. Suspend public deployments of non-licensed frameworks until evaluation is complete. He titled it, The Ananta Problem. But what Andrei didn't understand was that Ananta was not a problem. It was a mirror, it showed. What happens when people are given tools and trust, when they're no longer treated as users, but as creators? Within days, the draft memo was leaked, and the world reacted hard. In Bangladesh, farmers held up their dashboards like protest signs. In Chile, students formed human chains around rural Wi-Fi towers. In Senegal, volunteers began printing Ananta lives in US shirts and handing them out in marketplaces. It wasn't about Sundar anymore. It wasn't even about Elon. It was about a generation that had built something fragile, honest. And finally, their own end now watched as governments prepared to take it away at Google's campus in Mountain View. Sundar sat in a quiet meeting room with a circle of advisors and international legal experts. The screen before them showed a live vote counter from the Digital Oversight Council's emergency session. The vote would determine whether to enforce a moratorium on decentralized AI models. Pending review, if the vote passed, Ananta and Co-Create would be frozen, paused, and possibly dismantled. Sundar didn't speak much during the meeting. He just listened, his hands folded, his breath steady. Finally, a young advisor asked the question everyone was thinking. Should we fight this? Call in political support? Launch a media campaign? Sundar looked at her and smiled gently. Double quotes. No, we don't fight it. We show them what it really is. How? He tapped the screen. We let the world speak. Cross continents. Community. Leaders began uploading 3-minute videos to a shared open channel. No edits, no effects, just raw testimony. A blind teacher in Ethiopia explaining how he used Ananta to create Braille-compatible AI modules. A midwife in Cambodia showing how a local pregnancy tracker had reduced maternal deaths by 32%. A teenager in Montenegro displaying her mental health chatbot built from her own healing journey. Each story ended with the same line: we are not users, we are builders. Meanwhile, Elon was in Texas, standing before his team at Tesla Rural. He looked tired, but focused. We built Origin to lead, he said. But the world doesn't need leaders right now. It needs allies. He paused, then added, "Release our full framework. No licenses, no conditions. Get fully compatible with Ananta." His team stared. "Are you sure?" His KTO asked. "This means surrendering control?" Elon smiled slightly. "No, it means catching up." The clock was ticking. In Geneva, the vote began. 40-3 nations, one by one. Digital flags lit up on the Oversight Council. Screen yes, no, yes, no. The tension around the world was unbearable. Communities gathered in schools, libraries, rooftops watching the vote on borrowed projectors and phones held up to the sky. At the very last moment, a surprise came. Pakistan's representative, who was expected to vote yes, raised her hand instead. "We have changed our position," she said. "We vote no to suspension, because we've already seen what Ananta can do in our flood-prone regions. Our people are safer because of it, and safety cannot wait." Final tally, 22 yes, 21 no. It was a tie and the tiebreaker. The chairperson of the council, André Millefel, he stood at the center of the chamber, the document still in hand. His finger hovered over the vote terminal, but he didn't press it. He looked up around the room, at the screens, at the faces of those who had seen the world change in ways they never imagined, and then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a photograph. It showed a small, weathered village at his childhood home. He had left it behind decades ago to pursue a life of order and law. He never looked. But now, something inside him stirred. He thought of the people he'd forgotten, the dreams they had, the systems that had ignored them, the quiet hopes they buried every day under noise and command. Then he whispered a line that was barely audible. "Maybe they've earned their voice." He pressed the button, no, to suspension. The room erupted around the world. Celebrations began, not of victory, but of validation, not of revolution, but of recognition. People didn't want to rule the world. They just wanted to be heard in it. Back in Chenapur, Mina stood at her school's new digital hub. Students crowded around. She smiled, but her eyes looked out toward the hills, toward the future. She knew this was just one battle. More would come. But for now they had space, and space was enough. Enough to build, enough to dream. Enough to remind the world. True power is not the ability to speak the loudest, but the grace to listen the longest. And so, under the same sky where it all began, Sundar looked up once more. This time he wasn't alone. He stood beside the people, and together they walked into a future no one could own, because it belonged to everyone.